Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hello, I'm the Game Professor. I make the YouTube series Games as Lit 101, where I talk about interactive storytelling and do in-depth analyses of specific games and such. And you know what? I hate the term walking simulator. Like many video game genre titles, it's not a good descriptor of its games, but unlike any other video game genre that I can think of at least, the term itself is derogatory, intentionally. In all fairness, most video game genres are named to describe their game's mechanics, the methods of interaction they center around, but this genre is largely focused on exploration and storytelling, with the game mechanics, as we commonly understand them, simplified to often little more than traversal. So sure, if a game is nothing more than the things the player does while playing it, these games do indeed simulate walking. But reducing them to that one action is such a reductive way of referring to a genre focused on storytelling through exploration, which, if you remember when the term was coined following the release of Dear Esther, was very much the point, to label these games as not real games. So the fact that that mocking label has stuck around as the primary way to refer to this genre of narrative exploration is a not insignificant source of consternation for me. Especially when games like Tacoma exist to handily demonstrate that this genre is far more than just walking around. Tacoma is Fullbright Games' follow-up to their previous game, Gone Home, which did about as much to cement the genre as Dear Esther had done a year prior. In Tacoma, players take the role of Amy Ferrier, a contractor hired to board the space station Tacoma and retrieve the station's AI, Odin. That may be her only objective, but the station's crew surveillance data, strangely, wasn't entirely wiped, so Amy can recover chunks of what happened and see what happened with the crew play out in augmented reality. And this is what I think makes the game just absolute genius. Amy can control the playback of these events, and they span the whole area of the ship that she's in at the time. So there may be a point where the whole crew is in the same place, talking to each other, but there are also times when two are off somewhere else, and one is talking to Odin in a different room, all at the same time. So the player winds up watching the events from one perspective, following one or two characters in their conversations, then rewinding to see what someone else was doing at the same time. It's a really brilliant method of narrative conveyance, essentially turning the whole experience into a process of exploring not just the ship's physical space, but the various angles from which to view the events themselves. The process of playing Tacoma is involved enough that I'd argue it sidesteps the "it's not a real game" criticisms often leveled at this genre. There may be no loss conditions or game over screens, but the player is using the game's mechanics to piece together a narrative puzzle. Non-traditional gameplay, sure, but it unquestionably fits the definition. But of course, none of that would matter if the story being told wasn't any good, and thankfully, Tacoma's story is really compelling. The events that happened aboard the space station revolve around an oxygen and communication failure. The crew has a couple days' worth of oxygen, tops, and the logs the player is decrypting and viewing depict their efforts to survive this ordeal. With the help of the ship's AI, of course, the one Amy is on board to retrieve for the Venturis Corporation. It's a familiar enough narrative hook for sci-fi, especially for sci-fi games that take place aboard empty spacefaring vessels, but trust me when I say that not all of it plays out the way a genre-savvy sci-fi aficionado might expect. And, thanks to the aforementioned brilliance of Tacoma's storytelling engine, it's a joy to explore and figure out. The characters are all written very well and feel human. Their relationships to each other, their struggles in the daily grind of working on this space station, their loved ones both here and on Earth. As the player explores the events on the ship, they get to know these characters in pretty great detail, and they all feel very real and relatable. That relatability is key, because it also makes the game kind of horrifying when it comes to its depiction of a society entirely ruled by corporate capitalism. See, Tacoma takes place in a future where most of the world suffered a complete collapse of currency, and in response, corporations rose up with their own unique currency: loyalty. When you work at a company, you generate loyalty. When you go to a corporate university, you generate loyalty, and that loyalty is how you make purchases and survive in this future. What's worse, it doesn't transfer between companies. If you leave a company, you lose all their loyalty and start over. If you go to one corporate university and try to get a job with a different corporation, they're unlikely to accept. People in Tacoma's future live entirely at the whims of large corporations that, I would say this is a spoiler, but it's entirely unsurprising, absolutely do not have the best interests of their employees at heart. The terrifying thing is how relatable so much of this ends up being. The dad trying to pay for his son's college, but who can't because his son wants to attend an art school belonging to a different corporation. The married couple trying to stay together when any good job opportunities they pursue would keep them apart. The worker denied access to the tools necessary to do her job because upper management has inscrutable reasons to keep her out. A society that's increasingly moving toward automation, but rather than restructuring itself to care for the people while machines do their work, those savings flow upward and the common person suffers in poverty for it. There's more to it, of course. The commentary on capitalism and class struggle is some really interesting speculative sci-fi, in my opinion. But what really makes it work is how little removed some of these characters' struggles with it feel compared to daily life in 2023. It's a very compelling argument against corporate capitalism sold by incisive political insights and relatable characters. But in the end, it's a really hopeful game. It paints a glum vision of the future, sure, but as far as the actual events of the story go, its lows exist to bring out hope and satisfaction in the end. Tacoma is a story that asks you to explore, to find it, to plumb its hidden depths and come out with something hopeful, kind, and affirming, out of a situation born of greed and control. And that makes for some compelling interactive fiction if I've ever seen it. Happy gaming!
Do you feel like you're the only person in your circle who wants to go deep about video games regularly?
We were like that too, until now.
Welcome to Crossplay Conversations, the brand new bi-weekly topical video game podcast from Luke Lewis,
Joseph Hooper,
And Jacob McCord.
with many years of breaking it down separately on shows like the Left Behind Game Club, Player Podcast, and Lukewarm Games, the gang is finally coming together to publish their gaming group chat in audio form every other week.
Expect roundtable reviews of the latest games, profiles of upcoming indies, and insightful conversations about essential topics in the video game industry. All with a mostly positive, insightful, and fun style.
Crossplay Conversations debuts on August 1st with brand new episodes hitting every other Tuesday. Help us out by subscribing on your podcast platform of choice to get the first episodes delivered straight to your feed.
And follow us on Twitter at Crossplay Convos for updates about the show.
Cheers
and happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.